Welcome back to SE in the Loop. My name is Sydney Williams, and today with me I have Dr. Kyle Lincoln. Dr. Lincoln, how are you doing this morning?
I'm pretty well. A little jet lagged, but in the right kind of way, so that's always a good place to be.
Why are you a little jet lagged? Why don't you tell me where you've been?
So we actually just got back only a few days ago from a Southeastern Study Abroad trip over spring break to most of mainland Greece. Actually, we saw a total of about 7 different sites, most of them on the UNESCO list, World Heritage Site. And so Bolt, myself, and 28 other travelers wandered all around Greece for a study abroad trip that's been a couple years in the planning, a little bit delayed, but those things do happen in the age of COVID. But here we are, back and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. At least one of us. I don't have a real tail. It's just Bolt that does. But
well, I got to watch some of your trip on Facebook, and it seemed like so much fun. What was your biggest highlight from that trip?
So there's not a good way to say this without it sounding callous, Sydney, so I'm just going to come right out and say it. My favorite part about study abroad programs is when students cry and they can't tell you why. That sounds really evil, but hear me out. We were climbing the Acrocorinth. So every Greek city has an Acropolis. It's not just Athens. Athens is by far the most famous. But the Acrocorinth, the Acropolis of Corinth, is on top of an actual mountain. And I don't mean like, a mountain in the sense that it's a big hill. It is a mountain. There is a guard post. You can fall off and be in a lot of trouble, right? At the top of that mountain is one of the oldest sanctuaries to Aphrodite. It's where the Temple of Corinth's main shrine is actually up there. There was a smaller one down in the city that was more popular, but most people needed to climb all the way up there for marriage renewals, for all kinds of other social and cultural activities. But it's a hike. It is quite a few hundred meters in the air. And as we were coming back down, a student who actually works on Green Eggs and Hamlet, the English department's lit magazine, was in tears. And I was worried because we're climbing on top of a mountain. This is an open archaeological preserve. I thought she had hurt herself. She had, something had happened. And I said, Kara, what's wrong? And through tears and blubber, she said, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And it's really easy for me to tell you that story. It'd be like, well, that was a powerful moment for her, right? She went up to the sanctuary of Aphrodite at the top of a mountain in Corinth, overlooking both sides of the bay, either side of the harbors of Corinth. And that in and of itself is a beautiful thing. But Kara's story was unique for her, but it wasn't unique on the trip. Everybody had a moment where it was the Great Theater of Epidaurus and how big this stadium is, or a foot race in Olympia between a librarian and 3 students. There are all of those moments that, for me, they'll each choose their own. But as cliche as it is, right, there are times where in a teaching role, you can't point to one moment specifically, but you can point to that, it when you see it moment. When a light bulb goes off in somebody's head and they say, hey, that was really special for me. So that even if they were a little seasick from cruising around a bunch of islands in the Aegean, they would say, but that temple we went to on the island was something else. That monastery we visited was amazing. The dancing lessons, the folk dancing lessons on the ship were special. And there were a lot of moments like that, whether it was at the site for the Oracle at Delphi, whether it was the temples at Olympia, the Acropolis in Athens. There were a lot of really special moments. And for me, that's the reason I keep doing this, right? Jet lag gets worse the older you get, just because you don't have the recovery time that you used to. But it's worth it every time to see, Bolt strolling through a field of clover in Greece is something special. And to see students climbing down from the sanctuary for Aphrodite there's nothing quite like it. And if you haven't taught a class before, you might not know exactly what I mean, but there's that moment when somebody really feels something in the pit of their stomach that you just can't replace. That for me is always the highlight. It's a cheater answer, but it's true. I could talk about my favorite restaurants until I'm blue in the face, but I don't need to match my suit today, I think.
Well, I know the students are kind of important, and it sounds like they had fun, but we have a real star of the show here with us, Bolt the Bison. How was his trip? How did he come about? Tell me a little bit about him.
So my mom was the first in our family to go to college, right? I know that's a story a lot of people have around Southeastern, right? A parent or an aunt or an uncle. Somebody that said, you have to go because this is what it does for you, right? When it comes to student education. And my mom, from the time I was very small, I remember, every year she would read to her first graders a book called Flat Stanley. And the idea behind Flat Stanley is that there's this little boy who gets squished by a bookcase, and so he can't go on normal adventures like everybody else can. And so instead, his family puts him in an envelope and they mail him to family friends all around the world. And Stanley goes on all of these great adventures. And I remember as a little boy thinking, wow, those are cool things to do. And so when I went on study abroad, I got a scholarship to live for 6 months in Rome when I was an undergrad. And my mom sent me a Flat Stanley for a little boy who didn't have any family outside the county where we lived. And she said, can you take him all around Italy with you? Can you take him when you go to Sicily? Can you take him to these places? And I did, and a first grader turning into a second grader wrote me a little thank you note. And right, exactly, right. That's exactly the right face to make, Sydney. It was a heart-melting moment. And so when I started to think about, when I was going through our inventory for people whose passports had a date of issue like last October, right? They had just gotten, this is their first trip out of the country. This is their first trip maybe out of the area, right? And I say area loosely, right? Because Texas doesn't really count as a separate state unless you ask Texans. But there's a kind of beautiful wraparound to that. And so I thought, well, if that's true, right, who do people usually think about when they think about Southeastern? Nobody knows anybody in Stanley anymore. That's not a common name, but everybody knows Bolt. And so I thought it would be great to bring Bolt with us. And so Student Life got him all set to go. They paid for his trip, which is good because Bison ticket fares are a little complicated with international airlines. And he came with us, and along the way, we did a series of Facebook posts. We're going to try and turn it into a little bit of a yearbook for study abroad called Bolt on My Backpack, because he's got a little harness, and he clipped onto people's backpacks and came with us everywhere from the Sanctuary at Aphrodite's mountain in Corinth to the Bay of the Salonika, the islands in the middle of the Aegean. He came with us to Olympia. He came with us to Delphi. So, most of the important places in Greece that people talk about and that people remember, Bolt has been. And I think for a lot of people, if Bolt can do it, why can't I? That hits different. And so he came with us, and we took turns. Each of the groups of students, and 2 brothers took a day, a mom and a daughter. The mom's a graduate student, the daughter's a freshman, took turns chronicling his adventures during the day, and everywhere from catching a misbehaved tourist who was carving his name into a temple with his keys at Cape Saunion, the Temple of Poseidon. So Bolt and I very quickly went over to the guards and got him escorted off the monument site because it's not okay to carve your name into other people's sacred places. And so, whether it was acting as a sort of deputized international law enforcement officer or just taking in the sights, I think Bolt and I had a pretty good trip, and I know he's ready to go back. He's got a really busy travel schedule next spring. He's got to be in Belize and Guatemala and in England and Scotland next year. So that's going to be a pretty busy day for such a small little bison. But, it's important to have goals.
Little bison, big world.
That's right.
So let's go back to that piece where you talked about Bolt having a scholarship to go. How can students get scholarships? How do they save? What are some steps they need to take to be able to prepare to go on a study abroad trip?
Right. That's a really important question, Sydney. It's the second most important question with study abroad. I think the easiest and simplest answer is make sure you fill out a FAFSA. I realize that's an easy thing to say, but the amount of students, Southeastern students especially, who leave lots of free money on the table because they don't fill out paperwork would absolutely turn your hair gray. It's already making my beard go a little. And there's a real point to that, which is that when you fill out a FAFSA, it does a number of things. Yes, it gives you access to direct aid, right? The kind of money that the feds will send to Southeastern separately. But it also opens up a whole avenue of other scholarships. One of the most common for study abroad is called the Gilman Scholarship. The Gilman Foundation will pay for up to $5,000 of your study abroad program. If you meet certain qualifications, you've got to write some essays, you got to do a public service and engagement project to kind of share the joy of it. But Southeastern right now is batting something like 80% when it comes to those scholarships. Now, in part, that's because we've got smart students who want to go and want to do things and spend time in the essays. But in part, it's also that these foundations are set up to say, you deserve a chance, and it's not fair that money stand in the way. And filling out a FAFSA is the first step for that. There are also other foundations, other scholarships. The Gilman's just the most easily recognizable one. So, for example, students whose families are still active duty qualify for another separate category under the Gilman called the Gilman-McCain Scholarship, named after the late Senator McCain. And so that's a whole other track of money. One of the challenges, and one of the most important challenges when it comes to study abroad, is getting to pay for it, right? And so having somebody else pay for it is always a good plan. But one of the things that we do deliberately when we're planning study abroad programs for Southeastern is to make sure that it stays under that $5,000 cap for scholarship reasons, but also because our providers, the companies that we work with that handle all the logistics, that'll charter a bus, that will hire specific guides, that get the guide that maybe lets us in the side door so we don't wait in line and can spend more time in the beautiful places we go to. All of that logistical work comes with the opportunity to do everything from zero interest, zero cost payment plans, community fundraisers, having other people contribute. So there are a lot of ways to make it affordable. But by far, if that's the second most question, the most important question is, why wouldn't you? Right? It's really easy to tell ourselves, I can't, I shouldn't. Not for me, not yet. And it's really easy to say, you know, what's a girl in Boswell doing in Scotland, right? But 2 years ago, we had a Southeastern student spend a summer term at the University of Glasgow to get ready for graduate school, right? To go on this big, important adventure. And if you were to ask her whether she ever thought that was something she was going to do as a little girl, the answer would probably be no, right? And it's really easy to say no. No has one fewer letter than yes, right? But it's only one letter difference. And if you say yes to yourself and yes to your future with a study abroad program, that small difference, that one letter difference, is really, you know, the kind of difference that will change your life for the better. And there's not any better way to say it than that, right? It's, the costs are real. There's no doubting that. There are scholarships available. There are payment plans available. There are a lot of reasons not to go. But the best reason to go is looking you in the mirror every morning. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, I know that was something that mattered to Bolt. That was something that mattered to the 28 people that were coming with me, most of whom had never been to Greece before. For me, it was like going to visit cousins. But there's a beauty to it that you can't imagine if you live in a world of no. And so I think that's probably the best reason to go.
I've never thought about the one letter difference, and that, I think, changed a lot of people's perspectives, especially seeing how many students have gone this year. And I think the Bolt's Backpack Initiative was great because you got to feel like even if you weren't on the trip, you got to feel like you were having a piece of the trip. Yeah. Well, I've really appreciated you coming in today and bringing in Mr. Bolt the Bison. I can't wait to hear the stories he has to tell later. I think it's going to be so much fun, and I can't wait to see where he goes next.
And we're really excited about it, Sydney. Thanks.
Thank you for watching. This has been Sydney Williams with Dr. Kyle Lincoln in this episode of Southeastern in the Loop.